In the last few videos, we've been learning about the history of our town, Tigard. We've learned about Wilson and his son Charles and other important people in this community. Normally, we would take you on a field trip of this important location. This house belonged to John Tigard, one of Wilson's sons. But since we can't go on a real field trip this year, we're going to take a virtual field trip. So come with me and let's check out this amazing museum.
Hello, welcome to the John Tigard House. My name is Martha and I'm a volunteer at the house. I'd like to ask you to come in and see how we lived in the 1880s. Won't you come in? Here's our parlor. I don't know if you've ever heard the word parlor before, but that means living room in the olden days. This was where people entertained, and the room was always kept nice and neat. You'll notice that there's no television in here. There is this interesting article, which is an organ. They loved music. Most of the children were encouraged to play musical instruments. So there would be a violin and maybe a mandolin, and of course, this was their main entertainment. We have 3 rooms in this house. I'll bet you have more than 3 rooms in your house. How many bedrooms do you have in your house? 3, I hear? 5, really? Well, we have 3 rooms, period. That's all we have is 3 rooms. This is one of the most important ones. And as you can guess, all the rooms were important if that's all we had. You'll notice the decorations. Pictures of some of the family members. This is Wilson Tigard up here, who brought his family out in 1852. He looks fairly gruff, but he must have been nice. He had one son, he and his wife. His name was John. When John got married in 1882, they built this house for him. So that's why he is pictured up on the wall. Wilson is a very important figure in the family. We have other portraits over here of, here's Fritz Elsner. You may have seen Elsner Road. And did you notice that there are a lot of roads around here that are named after people? That's because they lived on those roads and were very important in the community. A parlor also always had a stove in it, and this wasn't to cook on. This was to keep the house warm. They would close off a room if they couldn't keep it heated. So here's a beautiful parlor stove that they would have used to entertain. We have pictures of many of the Tigard relatives in this room even. Here's a picture of Charles Fremont Tigard on the right and his younger brother, Hugh Butler Tigard, who was the last child born to the Tigards. They were all very important in the new life in Tigard. When they came here in 1852, they had to build churches and schools, their own houses, of course, and get their families started. They had to build a grange, and Charles Fremont Tigard and his wife started a general store. And years later, the postmaster came through town and said, "You're getting to be a big town. Where is your post office?" Well, Charles said, "We don't have one, but I guess we could have one here, and the name of this town is Tigardville." So the first post office was in the Tigard General Store. And it was located where the Goodwill is now on McDonald Street and 99. And here is the drawer where the stamps were sold out of the very first post office in Tigardville, Oregon. A parlor would also hold the fine dishes that they had to keep out of the way of harm by children running through the house. All the fancy dishes would be in there. And the ladies in the evening would sew or read a book over by the windows. In the olden days, there wasn't any electricity, so they used oil lamps or candles or kerosene lamps. We've added electricity so that we can keep the house warm, with heat, and safe. But they didn't have all of these beautiful things in the olden days. They had the oil lamps and kerosene lamps and candles. We're going to go into another very important room right now, but as you're coming, I want you to look at the other pictures on the wall, and you notice how tall the ceilings are, and you'll notice the pictures are hung really rather high. And that's called a picture rail that they were attached to up at the top, and then they would hang straight, and they didn't have to poke holes in the walls. They didn't want to do that. Now we're going into a room that we use as a workroom. I have now entered the bedroom of the Tigard house, the one bedroom of the Tigard house. I want you to notice the ceilings and the floors. They're all original. The very fine wood was found here in the Pacific Northwest. And this room housed 3 beds eventually. There was Mother and Father Tigard, and there was Frank and Jessie Tigard, the 2 boys born to this couple. Eventually, the boys got tired of sleeping in the bedroom with their parents, and they wanted to have a room of their own. So the parents cut a hole in the ceiling right up here and put a staircase up. It extended up into this big attic upstairs and all the way down here. So it was easy entry for the boys, and they could have their own room and giggle and snicker and play while their folks were pretending to be asleep. This room is filled now with memorabilia. We have lots of containers over here of acid-free paper. They contain the history of the town of Tigard. It's in photographs, newspaper articles, etc. Here we have the family history, which shows them coming over the Oregon Trail from Fort Smith, Arkansas in 1852. And you know, it took them 6 months to get here. I wonder how long it would take to drive these days. Well, they didn't drive, of course. If you notice in these pictures, they came in wagons, and mostly they had to walk. There wasn't much room in the wagons. They had to carry all their goods in the wagons, their food and food for the animals who pulled the wagons. It was a tough job. In this room, we try to keep history of the family of the Tigards themselves, as well as history of the Tigard city. You'll remember I mentioned the McDonald's store. That was started by C.F. Tigard, whom you've met before, and his wife Rosa. Over here we have a model of the store, which was built for us several years ago by a man named Roy Hodges. He built the store, and we were able to locate the safe that had originally been in that store. The store was built in 1893, and then later on it was sold to Anna Pollard, who was Rosa's sister, and she was married to McDonald. Over here in this case by the windows, we have memorabilia from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. You'll see a sewing kit, and this is called a darning egg down here. You'd put that in your sock, and then you'd be able to sew up the holes in it. They didn't throw much away in those days, you know. They reused a lot. Here are photo albums, hair curlers, a stereoscopic slide viewer. I love those. They're fun. Hardly see those anymore at all. If you come across any interesting items around your house or your grandparents' house, ask them about it. They're fascinating to know about. Now on this wall we have pictures of some of the school children in early Tigard. You'll notice these pictures, and they all have the same haircut. How do you think they arranged that? I think Mother had a cereal bowl she'd put on their head and then trim around it. Doesn't it look like that? Here's one of the marching bands at Tigard High. And this photo above shows some of the first churches. Over here on our left we have the first Tigard Elementary School. And these are all pictures you'll be able to see when you come and go through the Tigard house yourself. We have yearbooks from 1929 to 1979, and we collect more each time an alumnus wants to donate the books. I'd like you to come through into our kitchen now, which is the third room of our house. This is undoubtedly the most important room in the entire home, because here's where people ate at the table. They cooked over here on the stove. They did their laundry and took baths in that huge tub. And after the clothes were set out to dry, either outside if it was a nice day or in here if it was a rainy day, they did the ironing. And here are some of the old irons. You might get the impression that life was not as easy in the olden days. When they wanted to do any household chores, in order to get the water, they had to pump it from the well in the yard and either put it here if they needed cold water or here on the stove if they wanted hot water. But then they had to go and cut a tree down or chop up some wood in order to get fuel for the fire. Here's a piece of wood that would have to have been cut a little smaller in order to get it in there. Here's a piece of coal. Some people used coal also. A great deal depended on how much they could use this stove. Then when the food was prepared, here it is, right here on the table. When they were through with dinner, all this got whisked away and the laundry, was out of the way. The dishes were washed, and then this became the place where children could do their homework. Oh, but we forgot one very important person. The baby of the house had his own special chair. Usually his teddy didn't sit in the chair, but this one's just keeping it warm, ready for him. And here's baby's special plate. Over here you will notice a small desk. And in this very small room, that could have been the pantry. That's where they would keep the preserves, which means the fruits and vegetables that they had preserved from the gardens. They also had a cellar underneath the house where they would keep a lot of the food they had prepared that could be in cans waiting for them. This is generally what life in an old house looked like. Small, very cozy, but a lot of work. Everybody had to help. Here's one more item I want to show you from this room, and this is a chair that Wilson Tigard made from the wagon they came out here on in 1852. This is made partly out of a wagon wheel. Can you see which parts might have been from a wagon wheel? How about this great curve? There's lots of other wood used in here, anything that Wilson could find to put together. And they had square nails, which you can still see. And some unruly child who didn't realize the value of this actually carved his initials in the chair. I hope you'll come and see this all for yourself and be able to touch the history and feel the history of Tigard. We'd love to show it to you. And remember, you're making history today.